too different. Oh God, I've heard this all my life. Right now, I've heard this right now. I'm just too different. What do you mean you went to Ecuador, South America 13 years ago? My God, before that you were in the middle of Mexico. What's the matter with you? Yes, it's really tough. Not as an adult so much. Especially not as an adult over 70. I decided when I was 70 that it was my choice of how I lived my life. But the story I'm about to tell you explains to you why I became a special education teacher, and probably influences why I'm a real sucker for a story, for someone telling me what's going on in their life. My empathy levels are way too high. I get sucked in real easily because I know what it feels like. I'm real aware. Okay, story goes back to age 7 or 8. I'm not exactly sure. I don't even know where I was. I know that sounds weird, but that's the way it is when you're an Air Force brat, or what you call a military brat. You just don't know where you are, especially as a youngster, and we didn't have cell phones or anything like that. Then we didn't even have beepers. We had no way of really communicating with our parents, and it was really a tough time because General Curtis LeMay was my father's boss. My dad was part of what's called a SAC refueling team. It was during the Cold War, and we would get moved constantly, and I do mean that. We lived places as much as 2 days, as little as 2 days, and as much as 2 months. 2 months, that was it. We were always moving. They called him Curtis the Homewrecker LeMay for a reason. And they made the movie Dr. Strangelove about him for a reason, because the man was nuts. It was just nuts. Anyway, I had been moving repeatedly. I was in 2nd grade, and it was the first day I entered a classroom. I always got kidded because it was right after World War II. And my name was Dyslexia, which is Polish. The ski, everybody always picked up on that. I heard every Polish joke you could ever imagine. And I was inordinately tall. I was much taller than anybody else in my class, and there was 2 reasons for that. My mother was 6'1", and she held me back a year because she knew in moving they would put me back if I came into a state where they didn't accept my age to be the correct one for the grade. Okay, so I came into this classroom, and I remember being shocked because the first thing they did was give me a test. But everybody else was in the test too, so I went ahead and took the test like I was told. And I answered all the questions, and I turned it in. It was only a few days later that my mother and father were contacted and told to come at night to meet with the teacher and with some other people and me. And it's so hard because there's so few things I remember about my childhood, but I clearly remember this so well because it was so traumatizing. I learned later years that something that's really fun or really traumatizing is what children remember. So I always try to be fun when I'm teaching, but this was not. This was traumatizing. There were these suits, people in suits. There was a woman and 2 men, and I think the woman was my teacher, and the 2 men were from someplace, and my parents all standing at the front of the room, and just me sitting there on a desk. And one of the men walked over, and he opened this book thing, and he pointed to a question, and he said, "What's the answer to this question?" Okay, so I looked over at it, and I pointed to the answer, and he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because my dad opens the front of the car, and he sticks a long stick into the oil, and he looks at it, and he does it a lot. I mean, he really does, and so that's the answer. He's checking the oil in the car." And they closed the book, and they left. And, I'm really, really nervous. It was really upsetting to me because I had gone to, there were a total of 7 schools that I went to in 2nd grade in 9 months. We moved that much. And they were in states, all different states all over the United States. And I was very tall. I had a funny name, Polish. I had rheumatic fever. And I would, within 10 minutes, I'd go from being normal to having 106 fever and having to be taken out of the school. This was just, it was weird because there was no warning. I just would suddenly get extremely hot and have to be taken away. I was different because of the name. I was different because of the height. I was different because something went wrong with this test. It was really weird. Well, what happened is several months later, my parents got a letter caught up with them from the 2 suits that were the men who were in suits, who had shown me the test. And it was to inform them that I was classified as a gifted student and that I had scored 100% on the test. And the reason they came to me is, according to them, I had picked the least likely answer to the question that they asked. I don't know what the question was because, I was just a kid. But it was the least likely answer. But when they compared it to the answer they expected, it was more of a logical answer than the one that they had, but it was the least likely in their book, so now they counted both of those answers correct. And so they considered me 100%. So now I had a label. And I was the tall, weird, different kid, always the new kid who just came in with a funny Polish name, and now I was gifted. And it was during that same year they discovered I was also dyslexic. And it's not unusual for a bright student to also be dyslexic, but it's really upsetting, especially because my father insisted I always get superior on anything I studied. I mean, he was really adamant about it, and it was scary because I rarely saw my father. He was usually gone in the military, but he made a huge deal about education and my report cards. And I was different. I didn't relate as well to the other kids. I was kind of an oddball in a lot of ways. I loved school. God, I loved school. I would do anything for any program that was offered after school. And of course, by the time I got into junior high and high school, I didn't come home until the very last thing that I possibly could. I wanted to stay away from my mother. And so that made me different too, but that's not something you talk about, especially not in 2nd grade. How am I supposed to know? I'm moving all the time. I don't know, maybe all mothers are like my mother. My mother insulted me. She put me down all the time for being female. She used to beat me on a regular basis. She complained to everybody that I was impossible. I don't know what that meant. She would scream, impossible. Now what that did is it changed how I looked at people as I got older. And when I finally had the opportunity to go to college, of course I studied in art every opportunity I got, but it became very clear to me that there are no art teachers in the schools anymore, and my parents always complained I'd never make a living, and it was just on and on and on and on. There was just so many reasons, and I needed a scholarship. I didn't have money. My parents refused to give me any money because I'd married at 16. I was raped at 15, barely 15, and I was just different. When you're a mom at 15, everything's different. So I did anything to not come home. whatever I could that she could verify. That's where I was. That's what I do. And I realized that I never wanted to be a nurse or a teacher. My mother was a nurse, and I thought, a teacher is what girls do, and nurses. And at that time in the 50s, nobody did anything else except that's what girls did. And I was different enough, so I decided to go into teaching. I loved talking. I loved teaching. I just didn't want to be a teacher until I realized I had been too different. And so if I worked with kids who were too different, I would be good. I'd be good at it. I wouldn't be the best, but I'd be good at it because of my empathy. So I went to work early before I ever graduated. I was just barely, in fact, I think it was my first semester of taking courses for special education. Yeah, I'm sure it was. I went to work in a 200-year-old school on the border of Mexico and the United States, and every student in my class was an English language learner. A lot of them actually came from Mexico every day because we were right on the border. And they would cross over every day to come into the classroom. I had 32 students, all disabled. I ended up taking a closet and converting it into a classroom because there were 2 windows between the closet and the classroom, so I could watch. And that they allowed me to do that as long as, because I had a teacher's aide, because I had 2 students who were deaf, and I had 2 students who probably couldn't learn any, their IQs were way down in the 50s, 60s, and they were spastic too. So it was better to have those 4 students in this separate space where one person could concentrate on them. And it was an older woman who'd had a lot of experience, so she was in that room. And I was in the main room with 28 other kids and a helper. It was tough. I didn't have any background in it. But my empathy, that's what made it work. I remember that little guy, his name was Angel. And it was my first, what they call an IEP, Individualized Educational Program. Every disabled student has an individualized educational program, and every year the teacher has to update it. And it just so happened that I was the 3rd teacher. I came to work the first week of October. School had started the first week of September, and two teachers came and left in the month of September, and I started in the 1st of October. So I was the 3rd teacher for that classroom. So as you can imagine, it wasn't an easy classroom. But I sat down. It was wonderful. I was wonderful. I sat down with the mother, and she was the adopted mother of this boy, Angel. And she had her sister with her. And her sister introduced herself as a special education teacher from California, where the rules are incredibly strict. And we were to work on his IEP together. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate both that mother and her sister. They were so respectful to me, even though I had almost no background in what we were doing. They gave me the incredible level of confidence that I needed to continue in that program. And they explained to me just who Angel was. He'd been up for adoption in Mexico, and this woman had taken him. She knew that he had lots of problems. He did. He was extremely autistic. And I had to learn all the different things. And again, the sister was so helpful. It changed to a situation where my interaction with Angel was every morning at 7:15, week school. School started early, but I'd get there earlier than that, and he would be showing up in my room because he would sneak in. He was really good at doing things like that. And I would let him would take yardsticks and stick a skinny piece of paper towel on the fans. It was a very old school. It was 200 years old, but it had circulating air. And he'd stick it up there with a yardstick and a piece of masking tape. And then he was just fascinated watching it flutter. And that didn't bother me. I didn't care. As it turned out, as the story goes on, I had him for 2 years. When we got, I had him for 7th and 8th, and when he got to 9th grade, instead of having him in that classroom, his mother and I talked, and I went to work with I went to speak with the lady who ran the high school special education, and she agreed with me. He really had his hormones were locked in. I mean, they were locked in. He was always pulling chairs out from under girls and being inappropriate and running after them at mealtime, because he usually ate his meals in the classroom with me. He didn't like to join with the other. That's the problem with autism. It separates them, and yet they want to be involved, and it's very confusing. Anyway, we made a deal, and the school board agreed. We moved him from 8th grade to 10th grade so that he could go into the high school special education program. And as it turned out, I ran into his mother in the grocery store in what would have been his senior year in high school. And his mother was just, she was so grateful. She told me how much better it worked out because he was too different. He just didn't fit in. Even in that kind of a classroom, he didn't fit in. And I totally got it because I knew what I'd been through when I was too different. And it's really, really tough. And it's tough even for the teachers. And there's another too different one that I'd like to tell you about. It was the same classroom. I had a young lady who was very tall, which of course I was sympathetic to right away, but she was also extremely large. It wasn't that she was just fat, she was large. She had very big bones. She looked like she could have been a linebacker on a football team. You know, she just had that large about her, but she was a great kid, and she had just learning disability, so it wasn't as serious, and she was a good student. She was a very good student. She always worked really hard for me. I will never forget, again, it's about when you're too different. And this is why I'm making this video. I want you to understand that when you're too different, what you've got to do is grab a hold of any compliment or help or encouragement that you get from people, because that's exactly what you need, especially if you have a parent who's always complaining about how you're too different, or your friends or your buddies or your bullies or whatever are complaining about you being too different. Then you have to change that. You have to do something. You have to accept it, for one thing. Anyway, she did. What happened is my class went into a classroom that was what they called domestic. It used to be called sewing or cooking or household or whatever. But anyway, it was called domestic and health. They combined nutrition with sewing. And anyway, the kids were all in there. And this teacher was really overweight. And she never got out of the desk. She sat in that chair. The only time she moved was to go to lunch or to the restroom between classes. Other than that, she never moved from that desk. Everybody said it, everybody saw it, everybody talked about it. She just never moved from the desk. So sitting from the desk one day, she looks out at my classroom and says, I don't know why you guys even try. You know, nobody from Douglas, Arizona goes to college. That's all there is to it. You're not going to go to college. You're not going to be a success in life. You're all going to be failures, and that's just the way it is. And it turns out this big gal stood up and said, we are leaving now for Miss Mackenzie's room. Come on, guys. And she did. They all left and came back to my classroom. I couldn't believe it. I asked her, I said, what in the world happened? And she said, I got to write a letter. She did. I mean, she was tough. She was tough. She was a good kid. So she sat down and she was writing a letter to the principal about what occurred and how my class had been insulted and how that was something that I would never do. And she knew I would understand because I was that kind of a teacher. Well, it's because I was too different. As a youngster, I understood. I really knew. I knew at the bottom of my heart, I knew exactly what these kids were going through. They were trying to speak a different language. They were from a different culture. They were in a school that was not based on their culture or their lifestyles or their wishes or dreams or hopes or futures. I mean, I really understood. I got it. I really got it. And if you got it, if you'd like to know why I ran a nonprofit for years. We did a lot of things for children, and it was a wonderful experience. And down in the description is a link to the website that tells about the students and about the art that another friend and I have to offer to remind people to take care of the earth. This is the future for our kids. The earth is the future for the kids I was just talking about. The future for your kids and your grandkids. And that's why I always work for the earth. Thank you.